Hey everyone, my name's Chris from Create Daily, and today I'm going to show you the secret sauce on how to create 3 very different title cards using Adobe Photoshop and After Effects. If you're new here, there's no need to worry. By the end of this video, you will be an expert at creating your own title cards. In recent weeks, subscribers like you have been asking me to make this tutorial, which is why you're getting all the tips and tricks today. All of the assets I'm using in today's tutorial are from Envato Elements. They aren't a sponsor, but I do have an affiliate link in the description below that you should check out. The reason I use Envato Elements is because they offer unlimited downloads, so the creative options are endless. In today's tutorial, we'll be diving into design concepts, animating, and even creating our own custom transition. While this is a longer video, I have timestamps throughout the entire tutorial so you can skip around to where you'd like to go. Now let's jump into After Effects to get started with our first title card.
All right, so the first thing we're gonna do is create a solid. We'll drop this here, and then we have this texture right here. We actually need to animate this. So I'm gonna go to Composition, New Composition. We will call this Animated Texture. I'm going to bring our texture inside, and what we want to do is animate the scale, position, rotation. If you've seen any of my other tutorials, this is a pretty common technique. So I'm just going to go here and pull up keyframes for everything. And I'm going to be going up 8 frames and making some adjustments. Make further adjustments. Right click, toggle whole keyframe. So this is what we got. Pretty simple. Now what we need to do is actually loop our texture out. So I'm going to trim comp to work area, go back to our working slate, bring this animated texture in. Then I'm going to right click, go to time, enable time remapping. We're going to go to our last keyframe here. I'm going to go up 1 keyframe, set a keyframe, delete our last one, alt click the stopwatch and type in loop out. And what this allows us to do is it allows our actual pre-comp layer to loop out altogether. Now I separated everything by 8 frames because our actual frame rate for our composition is 24 frames per second. So they're all very precise cuts. Next thing we're going to do is change this to black and white, and we are going to change the blend mode to soft light right here. And so with the blend mode, this is what we have. Now say I wanted to see the texture a little bit more or less, I could just add a levels effect here, and then I could adjust the brightness or darkness to see more or less of the texture itself. All right, the next thing we're gonna do is we're actually going to layer on a second texture. So I'm going to get our second texture here. I'm going to plop it on top. It's pretty large. I'm gonna scale this down a good bit. I'm going to click P for position. I'll click the stopwatch and type in posterize time 6, followed by wiggle 222, 5. And what this does right away, you can see it just shakes a little bit. So this is how it looks right here. But what we're going to actually do is change the blend mode to this to multiply. So now we have 2 textures on top of one another, and this is how this looks. And same thing as before, say we wanted to actually see more or less of this texture, I could go to and add a levels effect here, and I can make further adjustments where maybe we see it a little bit less or a little bit more. So I want to see it just slightly less, and this is what that looks like. I'm going to bring up my proportional grid here. This is a rule of thirds grid. It's a very popular photography, cinematography, and design principle. If you don't know where to find this grid, I'll show you real quick. You go to Edit, Preferences, and then Grids and Guides. And then if you want the same color I have this lime green color. This is what it looks like. And then you just change your actual proportional grid to 3 horizontal, 3 vertical. So that is how you find that grid. All right, first thing we're gonna do is type in tip 1 and use our Dodoni font. Shrink this up and bring this to the top left. And I actually want this to be italicized. So I'm just gonna click this here. If you're working with a font type that doesn't have an italics option, you always can use this button. So now I'm going to create our lines for our tip 1. So I'm going to use the pen tool here. I have my stroke. I need to make this like maybe 10. Change the color to white. I'm going to click up here, hold shift, click down, click out, click back in. Now I'm going to click again and click here. This looks good. And by doing it this way, you actually create 2 shapes in the same shape layer. So it just helps keep things a little bit consolidated. We will label this tip line. Now what we're going to do is duplicate our tip text, center this up with our align tool, change the font to the Bebes bold. We don't want this to be italicized. I'm going to bring this up a good bit. And we are going to name this Slate. Cool. If this is your first time creating slates, I want to share a tip with you guys. Just because you have dead space doesn't mean you have to use it and fill it all the way. So just keep that in mind. All right, so next thing we're going to do is create our line for our word slate. So with my pen tool here, I'm just going to click, hold shift, click here. We're going to want to center this up, bring it below slate. I'll just label this slate line. Change the blend mode to add. And if we want, we can mess around with the color a little bit more if we want it to blend in a little bit better. I like something a little bit more subtle. Yeah, this works. Perfect. And I might actually want to shorten up this line a little bit. So I'm just going to go here, bring this in, recenter it. Nice. I like the way this is looking. Now that we got our design down, now it's time to start getting to the fun stuff, you know, animating. So funny enough, we're actually going to be animating all of these the same way. So we're going to make it easy on ourselves, and we're going to do all of our animations at the same time and then offset some keyframes. If you don't know what I mean, this will all make sense in a minute. I'm going to highlight all my layers here, set a position keyframe, go up to, let's say, a second, set another position keyframe, go back to our first keyframe, and we're going to hold shift and an arrow key and just start dragging things down. So here's what we have so far. It looks pretty boring. So what we're going to do next is highlight everything, click F9 to easy ease them. We'll start with our first keyframe, our position. For our tip 1, we'll go to our speed graph here, and we're going to hold shift and drag this last handle back. That way, we'll just solo it real quick. So as you see here, it starts off fast and then it eases into its final position point. So that's how that looks. And we're going to do that for all of our other keyframes. So with our easing, this is what we have. Now I just want to focus on the text for now. We'll revisit the lines in a little bit. So I'm just going to hide our lines for now. I'm going to start with our tip 1 word right here. I'm going to go to animate, position, then I'm going to go to add, selector, wiggly. I'm going to drop down our menu here. We're going to change our wiggles per second to 0, our correlation to 0, our position to 2 and 3. And then what we're going to do is go to our random seed, Alt, click the stopwatch and type in posterized time 3 followed by random 500. So what this does here is you actually see a little bit of shaking in the text itself. So that's what that does. And if you wanted to go crazy with it, you could adjust the position here and you could see how loud it can get. You can get really crazy with it. That's just hard to read. I wouldn't suggest that, but I'm just showing you guys what you can do. I might bump that up a little bit. Yeah, I like the way this is looking. So I'm just going to copy our animator right here and then go to our slate and paste it here. So now we have it on both words. All right, so next thing I want to do is actually add an echo effect. So I'm going to go to tip 1 and type in echo. What we're going to do is change this to 10 echoes. We're going to put a 0 in front of the decimal point here and change the echo operator to composite in back. So you see there's that little bit of a delay, those echoes right there as this animates in. And as you can imagine, we are doing the same thing with our main word. So we're just copying and pasting from one to another. And similar as before, if we want to make adjustments, we can. So maybe I want to change this one to 30. It could really drag. Kind of like that. So we'll keep it for the main word. Now what I want to do is animate our tip lines. And I actually want to move them down slightly just to have a little bit more separation. So what I'm going to do to animate this, I'm going to go to add, trim paths. Then for the trim paths, I'm going to bring our end percentage to 0, set a keyframe, bring it to the front, and bring this back up to 100. And same as before, I'm going to highlight the keyframes, click F9, go to our graph editor, and drag this handle in like this. Now we're going to do the same thing with our slate line. So I'm going to just copy the same trim paths here, and I'm going to paste it onto our slate line. Nice. This is looking good. So now that we've actually animated everything the way we want it to look, now we need to actually offset our keyframes so it comes in at different times and it looks a little bit more random. So before we set keyframes between the 0 frame and 1 second. So I'm just going to go to 12 seconds and click Alt in bracket. So we have things coming in as they're animating in. It's pretty quick. You see right here. We could even bring this up a frame or two. This is looking good. Nice. So now it's time for the fun stuff, the actual offsetting. What I want to do is I want to have tip 1 animate in, followed by the tip lines, then slate and the slate line. So I'm going to leave tip 1 where it's at. I'm going to go down 2 keyframes, drag our tip line 2 frames. I'm going to go 4 frames for our slate word, and then another 4 for our slate line. So here's what we have with that. So this is really where the secret sauce is. You can animate everything the same way, but when you bring it in at different times, it looks different altogether. Next thing I want to do is add a deep glow. That is a paid plugin, but it is totally worth the money. So I'm just gonna go add a deep glow here, change this to 0.3. I want to copy this deep glow. I want to paste it to my tip line and slate word. And for our slate word, we're going to even bring this down to like a 0.1. Drop the radius, cut that in half. So it's pretty subtle. Now it's time to add some sauce. So what I'm going to do is go to layer, new, adjustment layer. We will label this flicker. I'm going to add a curves effect to that. I'm going to bring it up here. Everything's going to get brighter, but just stick with me. This is a pretty cool little trick. I'm going to click T for the opacity, hold down Alt, click the stopwatch, and type in posterize time 6, followed by wiggle 300, 10. This is a very subtle effect, but adds just a slight bit of flickering on the screen if you're following at home. Now, if you want, you could always boost the curves or mess with the values here, but these are the values I like to use. So the next sauce tip I have for you is adding some grain. So I'm going to click Control Y, make a gray solid right here. I'm going to add the add grain effect, change the view mode to final output, change the intensity to 1.2, the size to 1.3, and the animation to 0.3. After this, I'm going to pre-comp this and label this grain. And what we're going to do is actually make this black and white by adding a tint effect, and we're going to change the blend mode to soft light. So this is a very subtle effect, but I think kind of makes things look a little bit more realistic. Adding grain and flicker is just a little bit of sauce that can really amplify your overall edits. So what we're going to do is actually animate things out the same way we did animating them in. So I'm going to click P for position on all of our layers right here. And then I'm going to go up to 1 second, and I'm going to move these up. I'm going to do our same keyframe animation, making sure that everything is brought over. It looks like it is. Now what I'm going to do is similar to before. We're going to offset our keyframes. We're going to do this a little bit differently now. I'm going to go down to keyframes, move this up 2. I'm going to go up 4. Do the same thing here. Go up another 4. Do the same thing here. And what I want to do is split all these where I feel like it's appropriate. So I'm just eyeing this right now. I could always adjust these layers later on if I want to. So we have things animating on, then we have things animating off. And right here, I feel like the actual, some of these animations stop a little bit. So I'm just going to cut these out early. Nice. So next thing we want to do is actually do a similar animation with our background. So I'm going to create a null, layer, null object. I will just call this BG controller. So we have our BG controller. I'm going to take our textures here and I'm going to parent them to our BG. I'm going to first scale everything up a little bit, and then I'm going to click P for position, go here, about, let's say 15 frames in, set another position keyframe, and then I'm going to start by bringing things low. F9, easy ease. Same thing, same routine. So right now we have the background moving, and then we have the text moving in right after. And I could even bump all of these up just a little bit. Yeah, that looks good. Same thing as before. So now what I'm going to do is set another position keyframe for the way out. So now we have everything animating in and out the way we want, but how do we actually overlay this over video? I'll show you how. I'm going to bring this down here. I'm going to trim comp to work area. we're going to go to our render comp. So I have a render comp here. What I want to do is create some quick flashes to animate in so we can actually overlay this onto video footage. So in order to do that, we're going to create some masks. So I'm going to first create a mask right here. You don't see anything, it's blank. What I'm going to do is go down, click mask path. I'm going to go up to, I'll go up 4 frames. All right, now what I'm going to do is bring this mask up, go another 4 frames. Now we're going to bring it up top. 1, 2, 3, 4. And now we are going to have a mask for the entire frame. So here's what it looks like. Now that looks kind of weird. So what we're going to do is make it flashy. So similar to before with our animated texture, I'm just going to right click here and go to toggle hold keyframe. So now it looks pretty slick. And the cool thing about this technique is that you could do this in several different ways. I'm just showing you guys a really simple version on how to do this. And right here, because this is a mask and it's on a render comp, this is actually can be overlaid onto video. So this is really cool. And this is a really simple method here. Now, if I wanted to do the same animation on the way out, all I need to do is copy our keyframes, go to the end, paste them, right click, time reverse keyframes, toggle hold keyframe, bring these to the very end here, and check it out. So by creating these little flash frames with your mask, you're actually able to overlay this onto video. And it's really simple to do the same thing in and out. You could do this with a lot of different shapes. You could have your keyframes be shorter, longer. Really, the options are endless. Last tip that is super important for not just this slate, but any slate you make that you want to overlay over video is your export settings. So I'm going to show you guys how to export this correctly. I'm going to go to composition, add to render queue. I'm going to click here. We're going to change our format to QuickTime and our channels to RGB plus alpha. Now, if this alpha option is grayed out, go to your format options here and make sure that you have the right codec. I'm using Apple ProRes 4444. Export it to where you want and you can now overlay it over video. So I hope you guys like this first example. Let's jump to the next one. So we're in Photoshop here and what we're gonna do is actually start our design and then jump into After Effects and get animating from there. So to get started, what I'm gonna do is create our text, working on our design. I'm gonna make this a bit bigger. I'm gonna bring this to the center here. This looks good. Next thing I'm gonna do is create our number. So we'll go with number 2 since this is the second slate we're working on. Gonna make that bigger. Center this up. All right. Bring it a little bit further. Next thing I'm gonna do is actually create our background square rectangle thing to go behind our number. So I'm going to click on my shape layer tool. I'm going to use this color yellow, which I'll paste in here. And I'm going to bring it just like that. We'll drop it below. As you saw, this is a really simple design, but we're going to take it a step further and just add a little touch that you're going to love. And in order to do that, we're actually going to create some fun background sketch looking lines. And I'm going to do that with my Wacom tablet right here. This is just a really useful tool I use for exercises like this. And I use it a lot in After Effects too. I have an affiliate link in the description below if you want to pick up one for yourself. All I'm going to do is click on my background. I'm going to add a new layer. And then I'm going to go to my brush tool and I'm using the Kyle Dry Media brushes. This is the exact brush that I'm using. And the reason I like this Wacom tablet is because it actually adjusts to the pressure of the pen. So if I draw hard, it's going to be a hard stroke. But if I lighten up my stroke, it's going to be lighter. It can be very faint. So that's the reason why I like drawing with a pen like this. It just gives me more flexibility. So what I'm going to do is actually hold down Shift. I'm going to draw a handful of lines going down. I'm making these random. Now what I'm going to do is create a new layer and make a bunch of horizontal lines. And in the example, these lines looked a lot more faint. I would just drop the opacity on those. I'm going to keep this as is for now, and then we could always adjust the opacity of these lines in After Effects if we want. So What we're going to do from here is save this out and then jump into After Effects. So I just brought our Photoshop file into After Effects here, and what we're going to do is get started with animating our text. Now I'm going to show you guys some cool shortcuts when working between the programs that you may or may not know that's just going to save you a lot of time. Right here with our text, I'm actually going to go right click, create, convert to editable text. So now we can actually edit our text, we can animate it, we could change it, and we could still maintain the actual design that we'd started with in Photoshop. It's a pretty cool tip. All right, so to animate our text, what we're gonna do is drop down our menu here, go to animate, and then go to opacity. Then we are going to add a blur. And what I'm gonna do is actually bring our opacity down to 0, and we're gonna bring our blur up to, like, let's say 50. Now what I'm going to do is drop down the range selectors for both of these, and I'll bring up this menu so we can just see it a little bit better. And I'm going to put a start keyframe here and go to 1 second, bring that to 0. Then with our blur range selector, I'm going to do the same thing and bring this up to 100. I'm going to relabel these as well to opacity, selector, blur, selector. Just makes it a little easier to follow along. So now when I have this up here, we see that there is a slight blur when each word is animating in, but it's very subtle and it's honestly kind of quick. So what I want to do here is actually offset our keyframes so the blur comes on slightly after the letter animates in. So I'm just going to go down 4 frames. This is already starting to look better. Now this is pretty blurry, so I think 50 was a little aggressive, so let's just drop it down to 20, maybe even 10. Yeah, that's starting to look good. So now what we're going to do is highlight all of our keyframes, click F9 to easy ease them. Then I'm going to click on our last keyframe, go to our graph editor, and I'm going to drag this handle to the left. And the same thing with our blur animator. This looks good, but I want to take it a step further. So what we're going to do is actually duplicate our text, and we're going to change this to stroke and label our first one fill. And then with our stroke text, we're going to change it to stroke. So I'm in my character panel and I'm going to just switch this and make it, let's say 2. And what I want is to have our stroke animate on first and then our fill to animate on after. So I'm going to put our fill above our stroke and I'm going to go down, let's say 4 frames and see how this looks. Turn this back on. Nice. So I really like the way this is looking, but I want to add just a little jiggle to these and make them move just a little bit more. So what I'm going to do is go to our position here and I'm going to alt click and I'm going to type in posterize time 6 followed by wiggle 222, 3. And then I'm going to right click, copy expression only and paste in the other text file as well. So now we have this little jiggle that's going with it. So what this expression does is that it makes things look a little bit choppier, a little bit more like stop motion, kind of like that Vox look. And that's what we're trying to go for with the slate like this. So this is looking really nice so far. All right, so the next thing we're going to animate is actually our yellow box right here. So I'm going to go to our box. I'm going to take our anchor point by pressing Y, and I'm going to bring this down to the bottom right corner. We're going to animate the scale, position, and rotation of this. So I'm going to put keyframes down for everything. I'm going to go up 12 frames and I'm going to set a keyframe for everything there as well. That way we have our endpoint, which is what we're looking at here. And what I'm going to do is actually bring this to, let's say 90 degrees, bring the position down slightly, and then change the scale to 0. So here's what we have. It kind of just pops up like that. This looks good. And we're going to do the same animation we did before with our text. So I like the way our box is looking so far, but I want to add some effects to roughen it up. And speaking of roughing it up, we are going to add a roughen edges. So with that, I'm going to change the border to 100. So you see right away it looks a little bit more like a blob. I'm going to change the edge sharpness to 5. Then I'm going to change the scale to 12. And it looks a little bit more like a circle or like a rounded square, but that's what we're going for here. So I like the way the box is looking. Now we need to animate our number. And if you remember the example, the number that's actually in the box itself is actually a stroke number. So we're going to convert this to editable text. And we're going to change this to a stroke like that. And we'll bump it up to, let's say, 2. Now what I'm going to do is actually animate our number 2 from the left to the right. So in order to do that, I'm going to put a position keyframe here. I'm going to go set another one right here at the start. And then I'm going to bring this back. We're going to bring this out of frame. We're going to do the same easing, F9 for easy ease. Drag our handle all the way to the left. And what I want to do is actually put in the same expression that we did for our other text. So I'm just going to go down here, copy expression only, and paste that in here as well. So it looks a little bit choppier. See how that's animating in? It looks pretty smooth. So here's what we're going to do. I want to actually have the number outside of the box be a fill, and then the number that's in the box be an actual stroke. So what I'm going to do is actually alpha matte our number 2 to our 2 background here. Bring that back up. So right now, this is what we have. But I want to see a number 2 animate in that's a fill. So I'm going to duplicate our number 2, and we'll call this one 2 stroke, and we'll call this 2 fill. And this is going to be an alpha invert. So I'm just going to flip the switch here. And so now, when I change it to a fill, it's going to animate in and then change to a fill just like that. And the next thing we're going to do is actually animate our background lines and bring them to life a little bit. So in order to do that, I'm going to hide everything besides our background lines. As you remember, we have our horizontal lines right here and our vertical lines. So we'll start with our horizontal lines. And what I'm going to do is actually pull out my pen tool, have a stroke at about, let's say 10, and I'm going to just create outlines that go over each one of our strokes. I'll bring that up a little bit. Keep in mind, I'm creating all of these strokes on the same shape layer. If I clicked outside the layer and I did it like this, I would create a new layer, which is fine. It just adds more layers to your overall project and it could be a lot more to keep up with. So I'm keeping it all on the same layer itself. Now, there are 2 different ways we can animate these. The first way is to click on the shape layer itself, add a trim paths, drop down here, and then have our endpoint and bring that down to 0. And see how, because I started on the left side, the lines that started from the left side, actually their start point is from the left, where the lines on the right side, their start point's from the right. So I'm just gonna go here, bring that down to 0, go up to 1 second, bring it up to 100. So here's what we have. I'm going to highlight these, easy ease. Do the same thing we did before, drag the handle to the left. So this is one way to animate the lines in. The other way to animate the lines in, if we want to just get a little bit more specific, we can copy our trim paths here and we could paste them in each individual shape in the actual shape layer. Doing it this way will give us more autonomy with the overall timing per line. So when I click on shape 1, I could paste the trim paths in there, go up 2 frames. Let's go down to shape 2, paste it. So now we have all of these lines animating in at different times. So those are the 2 methods. The first method is definitely the quicker method, but if you want to be very specific about your overall timing, now you have an option to do so. And similar to before, like how we stylize our background box, what we're going to do is actually stylize these lines. Now we won't see them, but it'll all make sense in a second. So I'm just going to zoom in here. So I'm going to add a rough and edges effect. I'm going to change our scale to, let's say 12. We'll change our edge sharpness to, let's say like 3. And then our border, we'll leave this at like 20, say 22. Nice. So the reason we're doing this is because it actually looks like it's being drawn on with a pen. And this is a really detailed note that I want you guys to take away from in this tutorial. Is just taking the extra time, not just to stylize your design, but how you're animating things in too. So we're just texturizing how we're actually bringing these things in. And we're going to label this horizontal lines matte. We'll go back out here. And what we're going to do now is go down to our horizontal lines. We will alpha matte our horizontal lines to our horizontal lines matte. Boom. So right away, you see them all animating in. So what we're going to do from here is actually repeat the process for the vertical lines. Now we're going to bring everything back in. just to see what it all looks like. Ooh, this is really coming to life. The design and animation is there. Now we're just going to add one last touch that I think is going to make this thing pop. So I actually have a texture here, a leather texture. I'm going to bring this in. I'm going to scale this down immensely. There we go. What I'm going to do is add some effects here and really blend this into the background. It's going to be subtle, but it'll look good. So we're going to add a tint effect to make it black and white. And then we are going to add a levels effect just to mess with the overall contrast of this. I want to make this just brighter. All right. Now what I'm going to do is actually create like a blobbish looking mask all around. Now what I'm going to do is feather this out to, let's say, 500. We can even take it up more. And then we're going to change the blend mode. And then what we're going to do from here is actually drop the opacity. And this is just another little subtle thing. You could barely tell there's even a texture there, but you could use paper, wood, concrete, leather. I mean, really any texture that you want. I just thought that the leather texture looked good in this example. So now that we have our design and animation ready to go, now we need to actually animate things out like we've done in other examples. So let me show you how to do that. So what we're going to do here is set a position keyframe for our fill and stroke text layers. And I'm going to move these up. And what I'm going to do is do the same animation we've done before with our easing, with our handles, and we're going to offset these a little bit. So we're going to actually start with our stroke, and we're going to move our fill like 6 frames after. Just like that. We're going to do the same thing with our number 2 here. And we're going to start this one a little bit sooner. Set position keyframes. Go up a second. And what we're going to do here is do the same thing. So we're going to do an offset with our stroke first, and then it's going to go to our fill. Just like that. Now this timing's a little bit off, so I'm just going to move these keyframes around a little bit so it lines up just a little bit better. And then with our background box, we're actually going to do the same thing. And I actually want to paste my same expression that I did earlier from our text to our box. That way it's just a little bit more consistent here. So now we know that our final out point is really should be like right around this 412 mark. So I'm just going to trim our comp down to our work area here. Now what we're going to do is create our render comp. So I'm going to go down to our working folder here, go here, change this to Slate render, bring that up to our render folder. Now we have our actual design animating from one point in to another point out. Similar to before, we're going to use some flash with some masks, and we're going to add just a little bit of flare. So in order to do that, I'm actually going to just draw a mask right here. So the next thing I'm going to do is actually set a scale keyframe. So I'll click here, go here, set another keyframe. And then I'm going to bring it up, highlight, toggle, keyframe, hold. So with that, it's just a quick little flash. And as you see, it's transparent, right? So it's going to be on video, overlay on top, animate in, and then we're going to animate it out. So we just reverse them. And now what we're going to do is do the same thing with our scale keyframe. So I'm going to click here, and then we're actually going to skip this keyframe here and then just scale this up. And then it's going to animate out. So now that we got our second slate finished, now it's time to go to our third option. All right, so we're getting started with our third slate here. This is definitely our most advanced slate, but if you followed along so far, you could definitely make this one. So we're gonna change things up a little bit and get started in Photoshop. And what we're gonna do is actually create a transition in Photoshop, export that out, and bring it into After Effects. Now that might seem like a lot, but if you followed along so far, you'll definitely be able to make this. Let me show you what I mean. So I'm gonna go to Window here, go down to Timeline. Next, what I'm going to do is create a new layer, and then I'm going to go to my brush tool. Now right away, we have our default Photoshop brush tool, but there are paper-shaped brushes that you can download online. I bought mine, and I have 2 different packs. I have this torn paper brushes 1 and 2. I'm just going to click on this one right here, and right away you see that we have a shape of a paper tear in the form of a brush. Now say I wanted to rotate this so it were vertical instead of horizontal, because they all default to horizontal. I would just click up here and then bring this direction like that. And then right away, it's now vertical. So that's how you switch directions. But we're gonna stay with what we have here. So I'm going to change the size of my brush by using my bracket keys. I'm gonna click on my layer and then click right here in the middle. And then what I'm gonna do next is duplicate this layer. And then I'm going to pick a different brush. Say this one here, and then click here. And then I'm going to duplicate this layer again. And this time we're going to just fill the slate, so we don't need to change our brushes again. I'm just going to make this really large. Click, click. So now we have 3 different layers that show the progression of our animation, of our transition. So what I need to do here is go down to this video timeline. And yes, Photoshop has a video timeline. Right here, I'm going to get rid of this white layer. We don't need that for anything. I'm going to go up 2 frames. We'll show everything. And I'm going to go here and go up 2 more frames. And then bring our next 2 layers up, then go up 2 more frames. And then bring this guy up. So now we could see what our actual transition is going to look like. And the cool thing is that we can actually overlay this over video because we're going to export this as a PNG sequence. So now that we've created our transition, I'm going to show you guys how to export this correctly. We're going to go to File, Export, Render Video. Now save these wherever you want. You want to make sure that you're sending them to a folder, not just a destination like your downloads, like what I'm doing, but actually save these to a folder because you're going to want to keep these all together. We want to make sure Photoshop image sequence is selected. We want to make sure that it is straight unmatted. Under our alpha channel options, we want to double check to make sure our dimensions are what they were. The frame rate, you could change this to whatever you want. I just stuck to the default on this one. And you want to make sure that you're only exporting out the work area, or as opposed to all frames. So work area meaning what is between these brackets here, and all frames meaning all frames. And then from there, you just render it out. So we're in After Effects here, and what we're going to start with is animating our text. So I'm just going to write out tip 3, center this up. We're using the Dharma Gothic C heavy font. And what I'm going to do is duplicate this and change this to thin. You want to make sure that to pull off this effect, you need a nice big blocky font like this that has a lot of different variations in there between thin to heavy. So that's something to keep in mind. That's why I like using this font. So I'm switching to thin here. I'm going to add a fill to our thin. I'm just going to make sure everything's aligned. Now what we're going to do is actually change the kerning here to get things lined up properly. So I'm doing it here, and if I feel like, hey, like things could still be lined up better, we'll still be able to make further changes. I'm just giving myself a head start here. So this is looking pretty good. The I and the P are a little off center, but the T and the 3 look good. So now what we're going to do is right click, create shapes from text. And we're going to do the same thing with our bold font too. Create shapes from text. I'm just going to label this tip 3 thin, tip 3 bold. It's always good to stay organized. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is go down to my contents here, and I'm going to go to my I, and I'm just going to bring this across with my arrow keys here, and the same with our P. I'm just going to bring this across here so it's just a little bit better balanced, a little bit more symmetrical. And with our T here, I might actually make some slight adjustments. That looks good. Now what I'm going to do is go up to our search bar here and type in path, and I'm going to set a keyframe for every place where we can set a keyframe. And then I'm going to do the same thing again here for our bold font. Awesome. So now we have keyframes for the paths on both of our shapes, on our thin text and our bold text. So now what I'm going to do is take a keyframe from our bold text and paste it into where our thin text path should be, right there. You see that right away how that's going to be morphing. All right, we're going to do the same thing for each keyframe here. I'm going to center this back up here. This is what it looks like. Looks pretty cool. So now we can get rid of everything else from before. What I'm going to do is get rid of this fill too. So now we see this animation come to life. It looks pretty sweet, but I want to spice this up a little bit. So what I'm going to do is highlight all of our keyframes, and I'm actually going to apply flow. It's a paid plugin, but you could do the same thing by easing your keyframes. This just saves me some time. So now it comes up a little bit faster. All right, now it's time to build our 3D scene. So I have all these assets here, so I'm going to just bring them all in. I'm going to make everything 3D. I'll turn off the dust for now. And then I'm going to actually create a camera as well. We'll leave it the default here. And we're going to just start putting things in space, making some adjustments, and really bringing this to life. So I'll show you how that's done. So I'm going to go to 2 view. I'm going to zoom out a good bit. I can stay zoomed in fine on this one. And I'm going to start off with our C. So right here, we're going to push this back 25,000 pixels. Looks pretty small, but what we're going to do is add a repeater. CC reptile. And we're just going to expand this out to the left. We're going to copy and paste that onto the right. And right away, you see there's these hard edges between. In order to combat that, I'm just going to go up to tiling and change it from repeat to unfold. And then it mirrors it, so it looks a little bit smoother. So that's the first thing we're going to do. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is bring in our clouds. So I have some clouds here, right here. I'm going to push this back to 8,000 pixels, shrink it up a bit. I'm going to bring this one over here and up. I'm going to bring our ocean down slightly too. Nice. I'm going to duplicate this, bring it over, bring it down. Okay. Now I'm going to parent one to the other. And I'm going to do just a slight animation where they're going from left to right. Nothing too crazy. And we're just going to keep this going throughout the entire duration of this composition. So these are barely moving. I can move them a little faster. Like that. And I forgot to mention, these are watercolored assets that I downloaded from my Envato Elements account. Next thing we're going to do is actually work on our dust. So we have our dust particles here. I'm going to push this back in Z space by 2,000 pixels. And then I'm going to change the blend mode to screen. And I'm going to add a deep glow. That way they just look nice and glowy and stand out a little bit more. All right, now it's time to work on our branches. So we have these little, I'm calling them branches. They look like seaweed, but you get the point. I'm working on these things, and I'm going to put this back in Z space by -1,000. And what I'm going to do is actually move the anchor point down here. That way, when we do any sort of like rotation or anything like that, it's all from the bottom. So that's why we moved the anchor point. So now what we're going to do is just bring this down here, shrink it, and from here we're going to click on our rotation, go up 1 second, let's say 10, go up another second, just like that. So here's what we have. It's a little too fast, so I'm just going to bring this out further. And we're going to easy ease these, and we are going to put in our loop out expression. So that way this is a continuous animation right here, just like that. Now what we're going to do is duplicate this, bring it across, and we're actually going to transform, flip horizontally. So now it goes up like that. Go here if we want, and actually time reverse keyframes, paste this first keyframe in at our third one for our loop out. And then now we have them looping in inwards and outwards at the same time. All right, so now it's time to bring in our text. So we have our text here. I'm gonna bring them in probably, I'd say like around 2 seconds. So we're gonna start off at thin and then eventually go to bold. And we're gonna back this up to 4,000 pixels. We'll make it larger. And I'm actually gonna move the anchor point to the very middle and make some more adjustments here. So now that we have our scene set up, we're going to stylize our assets and then do our camera animation. So let's start with our C here, and we're going to add a tritone effect, which allows us to adjust the highlights, midtones, and shadows as you see here. You can make it lighter, make it darker. I'm gonna make this just a bit lighter for our highlights. I'm gonna copy this color and then just make that a little bit lighter too, so it's pretty faint. I'm going to copy this tritone and I'm going to put it on our clouds, and with our clouds I'm going to make them a little bit darker. Cool. And then with our little branches here, we're gonna just use the default tritone settings. All right, I like where this is going, but now what we need to do to stylize this just a little bit further is to bring in a texture and animate it like we did in our other example. So I'm gonna do that again. You guys could just follow along. So now we have our looped out texture, and what I'm gonna do is make this 3D as well, and I will put this 5,000 into Z space, bring this up. We're going to change the blend mode to hard light, and depending on how much we wanna see or not see of this, we're gonna add a levels effect here and play around with the contrast. This is looking great. Now we're going to switch back to one view here, go full screen. What I want to do is zoom this in, and as this is zooming in, I want the text to change. So I'm going to set a keyframe here for position, and then I'm going to start zooming in. We're going to apply our same flow preset as earlier, and that way it animates in just like that. Now say we want to make some adjustments here. Maybe the clouds are too big and the branches are too far out. What I'm going to do is just make some design adjustments real quick. Nice, this looks really good. And we're going to start this here. So I'm just going to trim everything else. I want to show you guys one last tip for this slate. So what we're going to do is drop down our camera options here, turn depth of field on. We're going to crank up our aperture. And what I'm going to do is actually click on our camera layer, click on our text layer, so both of them are highlighted, go to layer, camera, link focus distance to layer. So this way, the entire time, no matter where the camera is animating, our text is going to stay in focus the entire time. I'm telling y'all, this is a huge lifesaver and shortcut. If you take anything away from this entire tutorial, this is the trick to use. And right away you could see, like, our branches and clouds are out of focus and our text is still in focus. And then right here, it's still in focus when it zooms in. So it's just a complete life hack. And I could crank this up even further if we want to exaggerate it at all, just to make it look a little bit more polished. It's looking really nice. All right, so you remember that transition we made earlier? We're about to jump back to and get this thing animating in and out, and I'm gonna show you how it's done. So we're gonna go to our project here. I'm going to bring in our paper from middle transition. We're gonna go to our render comp here, bring it in here. So this is what it looks like, and what I'm gonna actually do is rotate this. I wanna do a little bit of a different animation with this and scale it down. Now I made mine at 4K just because I have more flexibility when working in a 1920 by 1080 sequence. So that's why I'm able to get away with making adjustments like this. Go to our working slate here. I'm going to track math this to our paper transition so it animates in like this. And then we need to right click, time, freeze on last frame. So here's what we got. And one important tip I need to include here is that we actually need to apply motion blur to everything in this working comp. That way it just looks a little bit more natural. Man, this looks so good. I'm so happy with the way this turned out, and this is how you make an epic title card. As you can see, there's a lot of work that went into this tutorial. So let me know what you enjoy most about it. Thanks for watching and stay creative.